We live in a world where, well, things change so fast, don't they? Sometimes it feels like our moral compass just can't keep up.
Absolutely. New technologies, shifting norms, persistent inequalities.
Yeah.
It constantly throws us into these ethical gray areas.
Yeah, it's definitely less about clear black and white answers these days, more about, navigating these complex shades of right and wrong.
And that's precisely where applied ethics comes in. It's really about taking those big, abstract moral theories,
The ones philosophers debate endlessly.
exactly those, and using them to grapple with the concrete, real-world dilemmas we face, putting philosophy to work, essentially.
Right, and that's really our mission for this deep dive. We've looked at a range of sources that, okay, maybe they don't directly tackle every modern issue, but they offer some really powerful ways to think about them.
Today, we're focusing on three key arenas where these ethical challenges feel particularly sharp.
Okay, what are they?
First up, biomedical ethics. We'll dig into the moral questions around manipulating the human body and genome, things like gene editing, defining life, that sort of thing.
Big stuff.
Then we'll pivot to business ethics, looking at that constant tension between profit and principles, fair trade, global supply chains, you know the drill.
Always relevant.
And the third,
And finally, we'll tackle wealth distribution, the ethics of inequality, poverty, responsibility. It's a challenging one.
so for each area, the plan is outline the main dilemmas.
Yep. Outline the dilemmas, touch briefly on how different moral theories might see them, connect back to insights from our source materials where we can, and, importantly, leave you, the listener, with some questions to chew on.
Exactly, some real food for thought.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start unpacking biomedical ethics then. This feels like it gets to some really fundamental questions about life itself.
It really does. I mean, a central dilemma is just the ethics of intervening in the first place. With something like gene editing.
Right, the first thing you think of is, what could go wrong? Unintended consequences.
Precisely. Are we fixing one problem only to maybe create 5 new ones down the road? And a huge question, who gets access? Will these technologies just make existing health gaps even wider?
And you mentioned defining life. That opens up a whole other can of worms, doesn't it? Personhood, consciousness.
Oh, absolutely. These aren't just philosophical games. They have direct implications for debates around abortion, euthanasia, stem cell research, cloning, potentially.
Yeah, really profound stuff.
And often what it boils down to is this tension between individual autonomy, my right to decide about my own body, and the broader well-being of society.
Yeah.
How do we balance those?
Okay, so let's bring in those moral theories. How would a utilitarian, say, approach these biomedical questions?
Well, for a utilitarian, it's all about maximizing overall well-being, right? The greatest good for the greatest number.
So they'd weigh the pros and cons.
Exactly. For gene editing, they'd weigh the potential benefits like curing diseases, longer healthy lives against the potential harms, risks, inequality in access, maybe unforeseen social disruption. Whichever path leads to the best overall outcome is the ethical one from that perspective.
Okay, makes sense. Outcomes focused. What about deontology? Like Kantian ethics, focusing on duties and rights.
Right. Deontology shifts the focus. It's about inherent duties and rights, regardless of the consequences sometimes.
So, like a fundamental right to life.
So that could be one application, yeah. Informing views on abortion or euthanasia based on a perceived inherent right, not just the specific situation's outcomes. Or the duty to respect bodily autonomy, your right to refuse treatment, for example, even if others think it's best for you.
And virtue ethics, how does that fit in? Thinking about Confucianism, perhaps.
Yeah, virtue ethics changes the question. It asks, what kind of person should I be? Or what makes a virtuous society?
Less about rules, more about character.
Exactly. So drawing on someone like Confucius, you'd emphasize virtues like benevolence, righteousness, wisdom, compassion. How would a compassionate society handle gene editing? How can we use these tools justly? It's about cultivating the right character and values.
No, our sources didn't give us specific bioethics cases, but you mentioned connecting themes. How does someone like Taylor fit in, his ideas on authenticity?
That's a really interesting connection, actually. Taylor talks about living authentically according to your core values. So you have to ask, how might biomedical tech, especially things that change our biology, affect our sense of self, our ability to be truly ourselves?
Ah, so it's not just about fixing a problem, but whether the fix aligns with who you feel you are.
Right. Does it enhance your authentic life, or does it potentially distort it? And then you could, maybe cautiously, look at Nietzsche.
Cautiously, how so?
Well, his idea of self-overcoming, the drive to transcend limitations. You could see the push for biomedical enhancement as a modern expression of that, will to power, that drive to improve and overcome our biological constraints. It's an interpretive lens, not an endorsement, of course.
Framing it as a kind of human drive. Interesting. And Mill, individual liberty.
Mill's emphasis on liberty provides a strong argument for allowing individuals wide latitude in making choices about their own bodies and health.
So less regulation.
Potentially. It forces the question, how far should society go in regulating these very personal choices about health, reproduction, maybe even enhancement? Where's the line between protecting people and infringing on their freedom?
Okay, lots to think about there. So maybe some questions for you listening. Where do you think the line is between therapy and enhancement with genetics? How should we, as a society, handle really different views on things like the moral status of embryos? And ultimately, whose values should guide these decisions? Doctors? Patients? Society?
Heavy questions. Okay, let's shift now. Business ethics.
Right, where morality bumps up against the marketplace. Often feels like a direct conflict, doesn't it? Profit versus doing the right thing.
That tension is definitely central. Fair wages, safe conditions, environmental impact. They often seem at odds with maximizing profit.
And globalization just complicates everything further.
Hugely. Different laws, different standards. It opens the door to questions about fair trade, labor exploitation in supply chains, especially where there are big power imbalances.
We hear about that a lot. Child labor, unsafe factories.
Exactly. And it's not just external actions. There are ethics within business competition too, right? Intellectual property theft, espionage. Where does competition cross the line?
And the really big question, what's a business for? Just making money for shareholders? Or does it have wider responsibilities?
That fundamental question shapes everything else.
So applying our theories here, utilitarianism in business.
Again, it's about consequences. A utilitarian would look at a business decision, say, moving production overseas, and weigh the impact on all stakeholders. Workers in both countries, consumers, the environment, shareholders. The ethical choice maximizes the overall good.
Okay. And deontology, duties and obligations.
Deontology would stress inherent duties, a duty to treat employees fairly, a duty to be honest with customers, a duty not to harm the community.
Even if it costs money.
Potentially, yes. Think about Confucius again, fulfilling your role responsibly. A business has a societal role, and with that comes ethical duties that aren't just about the bottom line.
And virtue ethics in a company.
Focuses on character. What does it mean for a business to act with integrity, honesty, fairness? It's about building an ethical culture where people are encouraged to act virtuously and not just follow rules or calculate outcomes.
How might our sources shed light on real-world business issues? Fanon, for instance.
Fanon's analysis of colonial economic power dynamics is, unfortunately, still relevant. It helps us see how similar imbalances can play out in global supply chains today.
Where powerful corporations might benefit from weaker regulations or cheaper labor elsewhere.
Precisely. It's a lens to critically examine those power dynamics and the potential for exploitation. It pushes us to think about responsibility.
And Taylor's critique of instrumental reason.
Very relevant. Taylor warned against reducing everything to efficiency and calculation. In business, that means avoiding treating employees or the environment as just means to an end, just cogs in the profit machine.
A call for more humanity in business.
You could say that. Seeing the inherent value in people and ethical considerations, not just their utility for profit.
In Nietzsche, master-slave morality. How does that apply?
Again, used carefully as an analytical tool. It could prompt us to examine if some business practices reflect a dynamic where powerful players dominate or exploit weaker ones. Think maybe of predatory pricing or how gig economy workers are sometimes treated. It's about analyzing power, not labeling.
Makes you look at competitive practices differently. Okay, so questions for you here. How far does a company's responsibility extend down its supply chain? Is it truly possible to be super profitable and deeply ethical? What would that take? And what's the right role for regulation in all this?
Good questions. Okay, our final area, wealth distribution.
Always a hot topic. The sheer scale of inequality in some places. You have to ask, is this morally acceptable?
Exactly. Is it right for extreme wealth and grinding poverty to exist side by side? That's the core ethical question.
Which leads straight to, what responsibility do wealthy individuals or corporations have? Is charity enough? What about taxes?
Right. And what's the government's role? Should it actively redistribute wealth through taxes and social programs? Is that justice or is it overreach?
And underneath it all are different ideas of what's fair, right? Equality, equity, rewarding merit, meeting basic needs.
All those different conceptions of justice clash here.
So, looking at our sources again, Confucius on wealth,
Confucius had a nuanced view. He accepted poverty if it came about through proper means, but he strongly condemned getting rich dishonestly or unjustly.
So the how matters as much as the how much.
Very much so. It's an ancient echo of modern concerns about how fortunes are actually made.
Interesting. What about Taylor's ideas about political control?
Taylor worried about citizens losing control to impersonal forces. You could argue that extreme wealth inequality might contribute to that.
How so?
If vast wealth translates into overwhelming political influence, it could make ordinary citizens feel powerless, alienated from the democratic process. Economic inequality potentially bleeding into political inequality.
A worrying thought. And Mill, the common good.
Mill stressed our social nature and the duty to contribute to the common good. His ideas support the notion that those who benefit most from society might have a greater obligation to support it, perhaps through taxation or other means, to ensure the well-being of all.
It links personal success back to societal responsibility.
Precisely. We don't succeed in a vacuum.
Okay, so final set of prompts for you. What level of wealth inequality do you find morally justifiable? What are the best ethical arguments for or against different tax systems and welfare programs? And beyond what the law demands, what ethical duties do we have individuals, companies, to address poverty?
We've certainly covered a lot of ground today, navigating some really tricky ethical waters in biomedicine, business, and wealth distribution.
Yeah, and like we said at the start, we've really only scratched the surface. These are huge, complex issues.
Definitely. But hopefully what we've shown is that even if our sources weren't writing directly about gene editing or global supply chains, their ideas give us valuable tools.
Tools for thinking critically.
Exactly. Taylor on authenticity, Fanon on power, Confucius on virtue, Mill on liberty and responsibility. These frameworks help us dissect the ethical challenges we face right now.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. As technology races ahead, as societies keep changing, how do we make sure our ethical thinking keeps pace? How do we adapt our moral frameworks to guide us through these novel dilemmas in all these areas, our bodies, our businesses, our societies?
That's the ongoing challenge, isn't it? It really requires constant reflection and engagement from all of us.